Hello, hi, welcome. I'm Linda Amran Cooper. I'm Director of the Centre for Online and Distance Education at the University of London. And it's really lovely to see many, many names that I recognise and faces that I recognise on this call. So a warm welcome. We've got a really important session today around accessibility. And I'm very excited that we have the team from Leeds here to talk to us, both staff and students, which is excellent. I'm going to be handing over to Margaret, who's chairing today, in a moment. But I just wanted to mention a few accessibility features. If it's helpful, you can turn on the closed caption. It's the CC button in a little square, hopefully at the bottom of your bar, so you can see our words. We'll also be using the transcript, so you can see the transcript, and we've got chat open as well. So overall, we've got a lot going on the screen, and we've got lots of faces and lots of small dark boxes as well with names. So please feel free to turn off your camera if you don't want to be looking at us, or if you just want to listen to this, or let us know if there's other ways in which we can support your access to this session. Lovely to see people from putting stuff in the chat about where they are, and I'm really pleased to know that in the UK at least there is some good weather somewhere. It's not too bad here in London. So I'm going to hand over, and just one reminder, at the end of this session, which is being recorded, we will be uploading the video to our Code YouTube channel. So you'll be able to review the video, and we will also have a report on the session. One of the Code Fellows very kindly writes a report on the session, which will capture discussion and stuff from the chat, as well as other activity that's going on in the session. So very excited. Please let me hand over to Margaret, a great friend to the Centre for Online and Distance Education, an exceptional leader in digital education. So over to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you very much for hosting this with us from the University of Leeds. So yes, Linda, as you've mentioned, I'm at the University of Leeds. I'm leading on the growth of our fully online degree portfolio, and I'm especially excited today to bring together really a cross-institutional team for you all to really learn how one program has absolutely shifted the way we work across the institution, across our online portfolio in regards to digital accessibility, things that are non-negotiable, what has absolutely shifted, and what does that mean in practice. So there's a lot, a wealth of knowledge here on the panel, and really excited to have this opportunity. I do encourage you to, as we're having a conversation, this will be a conversational approach, that you add your questions to the chat. If I'm able and I see it, I will weave it into the discussion as and when in real time. If not, we'll capture those afterwards. So if you're able and if that makes sense, go ahead and just add your questions in, and we'll try to weave it in. And so that's a bit the format of today. Just so you know, we have 4 panelists. Unfortunately, Miro is off ill today, so he will not be joining us, but so we've got 4 of us. So I'm going to go ahead and say we've got Hannah Morgan, we've got Tahiya Brewin, we've got Emma Dibb, and we've got Claire Ashdown. And I would really love if we could start with Hannah, just for an introduction briefly first, and then we'll start going into it. Go ahead, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Morgan. I'm an associate professor in the School of Sociology and Social Policy, which is the academic department that runs this programme. And I'm the programme lead. I was brought in just after the programme was started to move into development, and so I've taken academic leadership of development and of delivery, where I'm also a module convener and tutor. And just to reiterate Miro's apologies, he's been struck down with a migraine and was very sorry not to be able to join us today.
Yes, that's unfortunate, but yeah, wishing him well. That's not a nice situation. So Tahiya, could you introduce yourself, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Hi, my name is Tahiya Brewin. I'm a learning designer at the University of Leeds. I initially started out as the lead instructional designer on this project, and I'm excited to be here today to share some of the work that we've done and the insights we've gathered along the way.
Amazing. We're lucky to have you. Dibb, please.
Thanks, Margaret. So I am Emma Dibb. I'm one of the 2 learning designers with Tahiya on the programme, the MSc in Disability Studies, Rights and Inclusion. I've worked at the University of Leeds and in the Digital Education Service for coming up to 8 years. I started off, as Tahiya did, as a lead instructional designer. I've been a course design manager in other parts of the Digital Education Service, and I've been a learning designer for nearly 3 years. I've worked on this particular programme. I didn't start from it right at the beginning. I was brought in on module 4, so part way through, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you so much, Emma. And now I'd like to, Claire, if you could introduce yourself. We are very lucky to have you, and you'll hear why in a moment. Go ahead, Claire.
Too kind, really. Thank you very much. My name is Claire Ashdown. I am one of the handful of students in the first cohort of the online Masters in Disability Studies, Rights and Inclusion. I am about 1.5 years away in now. I'm actually in the final stages of doing my final project, or dissertation, if you like. So we're all quite reflective at the minute and realizing, like, it's as difficult as it has been doing a master's degree. We're all kind of sad that it's ending. So it's been quite a journey.
I love that. We're gonna go into that one too. I want to learn more there, and I think those who have joined us today will be really interested in your journey. So as we kind of get started now, we are speaking about a fully online degree. It is a Master of Science in Disability Studies, Rights and Inclusion. And just to kick us off, just to understand what the program is, I'd like to invite Hannah to kind of tell us about the degree itself in the first instance, and then we'll go further. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Margaret. I've got some notes on the side, so I will just keep an eye on them to make sure I'm covering everything I wanted to. So the programme, as Margaret said, it is Disability Studies, Rights and Inclusion. It's a full master's programme, but we've also set out with a postgraduate diploma and a postgraduate certificate as entry qualifications as well as exit. So people can opt to do any of the 3 qualifications, or they can start with one and move between those, which for us was quite an important element of what we were providing. So disability studies has a very long lineage at Leeds, and in lots of ways, I think I can claim this, it's really the home of disability studies in the UK, certainly of disability studies education. There's been undergraduate and postgraduate teaching since the early 90s, and our first graduates at master's level were 1994, so we've just celebrated that anniversary. When the programme was first put together, it was both a campus-based 1-year programme, but also a 2-year distance learning programme, which in those days meant, I think, large packets of photocopied paper being sent out to people, tutorials by telephone, and residential weekends up in Leeds a couple of times a year. So kind of very traditional distance learning for the early 1990s. And it continued on those 2 parallel programmes for quite a considerable period of time. I took the Masters back in the late 1990s. It lapsed as a distance learning programme a little time ago, when it became clear that really distance learning had moved into online learning, and that the capacity at Leeds at that point wasn't there, whether that was in the school or at university level, to be adequately responding to kind of people's expectations of online learning. So it remained as a campus-based programme until very recently. I think it's fair to say the numbers were declining somewhat in the run-up to COVID. The programme, like all others, moved online during COVID, and then we lapsed it as we brought this programme as our main focus. So I think what's really good about disability studies at Leeds is we have a strong cohort of staff, particularly in the School of Sociology and Social Policy. We have kind of a much higher proportion of disability studies people, probably than most academic departments, which allows us to sort of develop and innovate in this area. But we also have a centre for disability studies and very wide networks across the university, probably in some of the more obvious subjects like education, in law, but also into places like engineering, history, and that's one of the factors that's kind of really fed into the programme. So as I mentioned, there's always been an attempt to do something alongside a traditional campus-based programme, in part aligned to our values as a disability studies programme and a recognition that there are people who want to do the programme who can't be Leeds-based or Leeds-based for significant periods of time. And when online learning at Leeds, and this is slightly before my time, and in fact before Margaret's as well, I think, there was a big shift to thinking about what would the online portfolio be at Leeds, and an opportunity for schools to kind of bid, if you like, to be one of the programmes coming through, and colleagues in the school, with a very strong support from our head of school and our faculty, made the case that we thought disability studies would be a strong contender, and there was a very strong argument for why we should be moving into that space. It aligns with a whole range of university values around trying to affect change in the world, but also around inclusion, compassionate learning, and a whole range of other factors that says we really ought to be proactively responding to a group of students who are in lots of ways experiencing significant barriers to campus-based learning for a whole variety of different reasons. So we had that kind of strong rationale for why online would work. We were clear that there was a pool of students. We knew there were students, whether that was internationally or perhaps for support reasons, access reasons, closer to home, who couldn't come and study on the programme. So we kind of had that kind of knowledge to start with. So we could address those kind of wider access issues in a programme that offered an opportunity to do that in a very different way, but also came with a significant resource. I think that's probably a fair kind of recognition that there was a kind of a slightly pragmatic approach. Was there was significant investment by the university in online, and that allows us to do a range of things that we simply wouldn't have been able to do for a campus-based programme. I think it's also fair to say that it's a very different programme to the one that I studied in the late 1990s, but also I think probably a couple of years ago, there was a definite sense that the programme needed significant revision, and so in reality it really is a new programme. We changed the title from simply being disability studies to being disability studies, rights and inclusion, which represented a kind of a broader focus, I think particularly on what might be seen as a vocational element to the programme. So a shift that we're seeing, I think, on all of our programmes, really, from the idea of postgraduate teaching being an undergraduate degree +1 to it being a recognition that we have students who do come through that route, but increasingly students who've taken time out and are returning to education, often after quite considerable periods of time. Excuse me, it's very sunny in Leeds, but that set off my hay fever, so I'm slightly coughy. So yeah, it was a programme that needed a very significant update and broadening. One of the areas that we were very aware of, that we weren't global enough in our perspectives. There's been very significant shifts generally, but particularly in our field, to recognise the experiences globally of disabled people and disabled academics. The programme itself has come from within the School of Sociology and Social Policy, and it's grounded in those disciplines. So it's very much a social science programme, but also the interdisciplinary field of disability studies, which does have input from law, from professional practice, and from a range of other disciplines. So although it is social science, it does kind of have fingers in other pots at the same time. What's significant or distinctive about our programme is that it's based on a social interpretation of disability. I think what's often referred to by the shorthand of a social model of disability. So we're not teaching people to work with disabled people. There are other programmes that do that are focused on rehabilitation or on areas of professional practice like social work, physiotherapy and education, and we certainly have people from those fields who come onto the programme. But it's much more about a focus on disability as an equality issue, on human rights, and as social justice. So our experiences is on the lived experiences of disabled people, but perhaps more importantly, it's about the inequalities and the discrimination that they experience, but also on different policy and practice responses to disability and how to affect change in those different spaces. And I think from having read every application for students who've come on the course, virtually everyone has a version of they want to change the world. They want to make a difference either in the space they're in or in a kind of a range of ways. So it is very much around affecting change and how people can do that in their particular circumstances. So that links to why accessibility is so important. It's about practicing what we preach on a very basic level, but it's also much more than that. It's core to those values, and particularly to the key slogan that comes from the disabled people's movement about nothing about us without us. Our programme has a high representation of disabled staff and also disabled people and their organisations in terms of both shaping and delivering the curriculum content, but also about ensuring that we are fully accessible, or as fully accessible as we can be, for disabled students who come with a variety of different support needs. And the reality is, I think in each of our cohorts, probably at least 50% of our students have a disability support statement. Now, that's a particular kind of characterisation of disabled students, so it doesn't capture everything, but it does kind of give an indication that we have a much higher proportion of disabled students on our programmes than most would usually have. And I think what was really exciting and what really delighted us as a programme team was DES's, so the Digital Education Service's, real embracing of the challenge that accessibility requirement made for online learning. We were definitely bringing lots of challenge, lots of questions, very high expectations about what we wanted to achieve. And it's been wonderful how positively that's been engaged with. It's not always easy, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the kind of the challenges and the things that have been a little bit more difficult as we go on. But I think when you start from a position where that challenge is seen as a positive, and that these are challenges to be grappled with together and invested in together, it's much easier. Often in disability studies, you end up feeling as the kind of the disability complainant in the room. You're always the person who puts your hand up to flag issues around access, or particularly around exclusion. So for that not to feel like a complaining or a difficult position, I think has been really welcomed. So we were able to identify and achieve a whole range of accessibility issues as standard, and a commitment to achieve that across the programme. So kind of a list of some of those, and if people want to kind of ask a bit more detail, I can go into them. All our videos and podcasts have captions and transcripts as standard, all text and diagrams. All our documents are available in Word and PDF. There's very clear adherence to a lot of the kind of the background accessibility standards, which as individual academics often we'd struggle with around kind of web accessibility, but we have a team behind us who can check and ensure that we're meeting those standards. There are constraints in the platform that we use at Leeds. I think, again, we'd acknowledge that as one of the, I see Tahiya smiling, as one of the big challenges that we've had, is that there are things outside our control that we've had to work within, and constraints that we have to work within. One of the areas that I've been really pleased to have supported by the university is that we've adopted a universal design for learning approach to assessment, which I think when you work in an inclusive education and a disability studies environment, you can sort of take for granted the assumptions about the good of those sorts of things and kind of forget some of the challenges. So one of the things that we've done is to have multiple modes of submission as standard for all our assessments. Students can decide by assessment whether they want to do a written version of the assignment, whether they want to do a recorded presentation, and that can be interpreted very broadly, whether they want to produce a script of what that presentation might be if they're someone who either doesn't want to or perhaps can't present in that way. And that raised a range of kind of practical issues and challenges around existing university expectations, around plagiarism software, around anonymous marking. And again, we've had a very positive response that's allowed us to work quite flexibly to make that work. And I'm very happy to kind of come back to some of the nitty-gritty of that if that's useful for people. I think one of the things that's been really positive is that we've started from a position of reducing the need for individual adjustments wherever possible. You can't do that entirely. Individual students will need specific adjustments because we recognise that access needs can sometimes be competing, they can be contradictory as well as being complementary. So that's one of the things that we navigate as we go through the course. And I think finally I'd want to highlight the way in which we've worked with a whole range of other services beyond kind of the bubble of our school and working with the Digital Education Service. So particularly with disability services, but also with digital compliance in terms of the university digital estate, with the library, with IT, to make sure that there was parity of access for online students more generally, but specifically given that high proportions of those students are disabled with a range of access needs, that we needed to make sure that submission systems, being able to get in touch with IT, all of those things would work for students at a distance.
Amazing. You've covered a lot there. And I think in some ways you've really highlighted the complexity of this. One, you know, just regardless of digital accessibility, the shift from being a distance program, more print-based, to a fully online degree, that in its own right is a massive shift. And what does that look like for the student? And then because of the subject area, that need to really have that digital accessibility right, and have that embedded. I appreciate what you said specifically about the investment needed. I think that will be very transparent in the conversation to follow. I also want to say that this has also pushed the boundaries of how we engage with our partners, with a platform, for example, but also internal partners across the professional services. So that is a really important shout out. And as we know, if you're in online education, oftentimes those principles in general are very much transferable to a campus, a learning environment, and it raises the bar across. And I think this is one of those gems of a story that really show and demonstrate that impact well beyond this program. And so I think that's really the excitement of having this conversation. So thank you so much, Hannah. That was incredibly helpful to really understand the history in that. I just wanted to touch now a little bit more. So you've got this program, we're going online. We know that there's some requirements. You've already said that you were working closely with the Digital Education Service, represented with Emma and Tahiya here. So talk about kind of that program level design, that first part, and then how does that, what was the collaboration with the learning designers and the kind of the early days, what did that look like?
So I wasn't involved in the very early days. The programme itself had been approved at the point I was appointed to lead it. I think a starting point is a recognition that as educators, we didn't have online specific knowledge and expertise. Like everyone else, we pivoted online during COVID. I was working at another institution, and the colleagues who were involved in the programme had all obviously done online learning, but none of us had done so with any real training, any opportunity for planning. It very much was that kind of Heath Robinson approach that lots of us had to adopt during COVID. And I think people didn't want to be online during that period. It wasn't a choice. Students certainly didn't. There were lots and lots of disadvantages. So I think in that sense, we had some awareness of what was involved in thinking about an online course. But one of the lovely things was we were starting with a course where people proactively wanted to be online. As a school, we wanted to be delivering it online, and our students, I think we have to acknowledge that not everyone who takes the course wants it to be an online programme. I think it's maybe that's the option that's accessible to them, but they have proactively decided to sign up for and are expecting to do an online course, which wasn't obviously the experience of our students during COVID. And I think that's a really helpful starting point. I think, and this is one of the discussions I've had with Margaret, I think we were probably slightly less programme focused than we were module focused in some of the developments. And with hindsight, that's one of the areas I think we would have liked to have had more time and space to work at a programme level to think about some of the overarching issues and questions. I think a lot of things we understood as we hit them the first time through the development process, and a number of us were more involved or more heavily involved from the beginning. I was involved in authoring and leading the first module. Other colleagues came on board kind of later, depending which modules they were involved with. So there was a lot of somewhere between making it up as we went along and an iterative process where we were learning and understanding on the basis of the guidance we were getting from colleagues who already worked in online learning, our own work, looking at what we thought would work, and developing some of those. So a kind of a really practical example of that is we've really embraced podcasts, and they work really well on our programme for a variety of reasons, but they weren't really on the agenda when we were talking about the first module. So the first module has a lot of video, and no podcast. The podcast, I don't know if Claire has noticed this, suddenly appeared in module 2, and then we've continued to use them. Now there's some practical issues in that you can get more bang for your buck for a podcast. They're less resource intensive than videos, but also they allowed us a long form discussion, which for a social science subject was really useful and helpful. So there were things like that kind of happened, I think, as we went along, as well as some of the design principles that we were introduced to and that we then, I think, negotiated. We came as a programme quite differently from the previous courses that have been involved in online learning. I think there are probably less social science programmes online than perhaps business or some other areas. And I think it's fair to say we're a reading discipline. Reading is a really big chunk of what students and staff need to do, and framing that in an online platform was kind of the basis of quite a lot of discussions, how we do that in a way that would be accessible and interactive, but also facilitated that kind of key disciplinary requirement.
Thank you, Hannah. And maybe now kind of Tahiya and Emma as well, like, so there's this big challenge, talk about how you were the internal partner, how did you pair up and partner with the academic staff, especially as they were new coming in, where they may be new to online and new to what does digital accessibility mean. So talk about a little bit that learning curve there, your own journey, maybe your own personal journey of what you've learned as well, but also how you could step in almost as an expert, or a perceived expert in the beginning, even though we know, there's a learning curve there. So yeah, Tahiya maybe, or Emma.
I can start. So as I said in my introduction, I started on this program not from the beginning. I started it in module 4, where Hannah was the module lead as well as the program lead, and the quick answer to the question is work very, very closely with Tahiya. I think that's a key learning, is that very, very close relationship with the learning designers and all our colleagues in the digital education service. So there are numerous stakeholders in the team that enable the program to be developed. It's not just the learning designers. We've got a team of project managers, graphic designers, videographers, learning technologists, etc., right up to the people that deliver the program to the students, such as Claire. So I think the key point is it's a real team effort and close collaboration. Close collaboration with the academic team, with Hannah as one of the members, and acknowledging that there are different module leads with different levels of experience. I worked with module leads later on in the program that hadn't worked on the program before. So it's providing that reassurance and the fact that it's a collaborative approach. I think that's the key message.
I think to add to that, thanks, Emma. We facilitated design workshops at the beginning of the program, where we would sit, and my counterparts, Lizzie and Lauren, would sit with the academic leads to design these modules. As we've said, that we've not taken a program level approach, but it was so essential to map out the activities and doing that design at the beginning, trying to negotiate where we would spend our time with the resources, as accessibility was our kind of key there. We negotiated what could be accessible, but also invigorating for the students. Didn't need to be necessarily less interactive, but how could we add those interactive elements in and be accessible at the same time? At the end of the day, I think what we all saw was the student was the center of our practice, and collaboration became easier that way with the academic team. We were all fighting for the same thing at the end, and always compromise and iteration through our modules. And I think we'll talk about that in a little while.
Thank you. Yeah. So it's really fascinating, just again, the complexity in this scenario, but also how it's really, framed a new way of working and engaging. Maybe I think there's quite a bit of interest, in the audience here about, some of the details. What does it really look like? What does that mean? You introduced, I think, early on as a team, user testing and, what tools will work, and then getting that feedback from that first iteration. Like you say, module 1 didn't have podcasts, then suddenly they appear. What has changed, from those early days, but also getting really concrete into, what are some of those, what does it mean in practice? What does it really look like in the virtual learning environment? I've already shared in the chat that this is in Blackboard Ultra, so that's the framing that we're working in. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that. I think Tahiya maybe is that your cue for the next stage.
Yes, and I'm going to hopefully share some slides.
Thank you.
I hope this works.
It does.
Excellent.
Looks good, Tahiya. Thank you.
Fantastic. So as a department, we aim to achieve the WCAG AA standard, and we build testing into our process to ensure compliance. But we never really conducted user testing to verify that overall experience. So what we did differently in this program was start that target audience testing first before we did any sort of development. And we did this by prototyping. We used our virtual learning platform, Blackboard, to create some of that content from the early modules. And we partnered with Web Usability, who were external testers, and they had testers with a wide range of accessibility needs, and they used different tools to do so. These kind of testers were recorded, and we were able to see in real time where they were spending their time, what they were struggling with. And it was so insightful to see that testing done in practice. This also added to our understanding of what we were able to change, and it was instrumental in guiding our improvements. Some of them were related to the virtual learning environment, Blackboard with things like the two-factor authentication, and the navigational structure as well, that I'll talk about in a second. So as you can see, we did the initial testing before any module development, and we've also learned from doing student evaluations and module feedback, and we've really taken an iterative approach to developing this program. I'm going to try and get to the next slide. So some of the quotes you can see here are about the testing. The navigation was a huge part of that. The testers didn't find it very useful or easy to navigate through. One of the main quotes that stuck with me was the third one on the screen here, that it's really exhausting. And I thought that was really fascinating to see how the tester was experiencing going through something that wasn't clear or didn't have maybe instructional text to guide them. So as I mentioned, there's some parts that we had the agency to change and some parts that we didn't. Taking this feedback, we flattened some of the structure, which meant reducing the pages, and this was a way to chunk the content, but instead of having multiple pages, we decided to use a single page with more headings and heading hierarchy, and that would reduce some of that user effort from scrolling or like going through multiple pages. One of the other things that this fed into was Blackboard's accordion style interface, and that was not very convenient for screen readers. It didn't work very well. So by reducing the number of pages, it also helped with that issue. For this program, it was probably one of the first that we used RVLE as the only method of delivering the content. We had tested tools such as H5P, and we found that they weren't as accessible as we integrated them with Blackboard's interface. So that was really interesting as well. I think I'll stop sharing there. I think it's really interesting to look at, the way that we developed the program after this testing, and we definitely used the initial user testing to coordinate how we would develop.
Yeah, can I just ask, and there's a question in the chat here too that I'd just like to weave in a bit about the timeline of that. So, you know, what was the time from the user testing to starting the module development to finishing the module? That would be a good one to raise maybe now. Whoever can answer that.
So we started the user testing before we created any of the module development. And sorry, would you repeat the last part of the question?
I think it's just the overall timeline. I mean, was it how long was the duration of user testing? Just like how many weeks, months, and then taking that to inform the module development? So a little bit of the time frame on that module development then.
I think we were working towards a different RAM and process for the first couple of modules. So we took a long time developing this first module. I think Hannah can speak to that as well. We had quite a few months to do this user testing and develop that first module. So I would say we were in development for the first module for almost 8 to 12 months, in that kind of ballpark, from the start of the learning design workshops and then developing the prototype and then going through the testing to then putting that into practice.
I think just in contrast, what might that look like now? I mean, is that how has that informed subsequent module development?
For sure.
Yeah.
I think now, because our department went through a restructure and we were scaling up, we've now changed the process of how we do things. Our development time is about 9 months to develop a module. So from start to finish, from the development window and our QA checks and everything, it's 9 months.
The full process, yeah.
Yes.
Hannah, you may want to come in, but I wanted to just make sure that we're being explicit about when we're talking about user testing, like who did we invite to that? What type of things were we considering? You've mentioned, or it's been mentioned here, screen readers. It's been mentioned about, audio. It's been mentioned about captions, and like there's a full range. And I just want to use this moment now to make sure that we're sharing, what were we looking for and who were we looking to serve in that process of user testing. Yeah, I'd be curious on that one. I don't know if that's a Hannah question, or Claire. Is there anything that you want to add in this as well?
I think some of the detail around the user testing is a bit difficult because I think it was slightly before Tahiya and Emma's involvement in the programme. I think there was quite a process of quotes from a number of different organisations, and quite a lot of thought went into kind of making sure that there were a variety of different approaches to testing, so that we weren't just thinking about some of the more obvious accessibility options around, as you say, audio or people who are using screen readers, but also to think about neurodiversity and what that experience might be of a particular platform. So when things are perhaps more complex to navigate, what student learning journey is. So there was quite a significant investment, I remember, from seeing the quotes by the Digital Education Service in doing that testing, which I think is testament to that commitment. I guess one of the bits of learning that we had, which I think probably as a teaching team we were more prepared for perhaps than some of the colleagues in DES, was that didn't sort all the accessibility issues. I mean, it gave us a baseline and identified a whole range of things that needed either to be addressed or adapted at kind of at development stage, but also a recognition that there were some things that it missed and it was inevitably going to miss. So that's not a criticism of the user testing, but I suppose a recognition that it's an important part of the process, but it is only part of the process. So we had a challenge that even though this work was done particularly around screen reader users, there was a recognition once we actually had screen reader users on the programme that even with everything that had been put in place, that time-wise actually was the big access issue. So technically it's accessible, but it takes so much longer if you're using a screen reader to read through some of the instructional text, to click between things, to click through to the library reading list, and then click through to a journal, to then click through to a page and then a PDF and so on. So the Digital Education Service has invested a huge amount of time in producing an alternative SharePoint. Now that's a reflection, I think, of some of the limitations with, we call it Minerva in-house. Is it Ultra? I think you refer to it.
It is Blackboard Ultra, yes, yeah.
So that's been a recognition that there's always going to be ways in which we're going to have to respond to individual students. Now we've done that. In fact, we've had at least 4 students in the first 4 cohorts who have been screen reader users with different types of visual impairment. We now have that complete SharePoint site, and we're doing a lot of extra work to improve that, working with the University Invests in the RNIB transcription unit. So by the end, I think, of this academic year, we're fairly confident that every single reading for the programme, every core or recommended reading, will be available in a Word document, which is a massive, massive undertaking. And even though all our readings are available electronically through the library, that's not enough in terms of access. So I think that's been one of the real challenges, is a recognition that some of these access issues are going to be ongoing. You can't kind of fix them out simply through accessibility testing.
Yes, thank you, Hannah. Emma, I'm going to bring you in a second, but to that, it just reminded me that actually, there's also the consideration of the broader piece, right? Our application portal, I think, realized it in its own right. Our application was not screen reader friendly. So it's well beyond the scope of the learning within the degree program itself. It's everything. It's the entire and full student experience. That needs to be considered in this. So it's fine to have the program, let's say, all user tested, etc. But there's all of the other systems that need to be used. So I'm going to bring in Emma, and I want to make sure that we're just keeping time as well. And I want to hear from Claire. So go ahead, Emma.
Thanks, Margaret. Just quickly speaking to a few of the points that you've made, Margaret and Hannah, and Tahiya's mentioned before about the iterative approach. So just want to make it clear that although yes, of course, we adhere to WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, Universal Design for Learning Guidelines, and Inclusive Learning Design. So all the accessibility guidelines, we need to be mindful from a pedagogical perspective. So Hannah said right at the beginning that this is a social sciences approach. So we didn't want to dilute the content. We wanted to make sure that learners have a choice of what to engage with, so rather than diluting the content. Another point to make that by adhering to those guidelines, we needed to make sure that what the user testing highlighted, that even though the heading hierarchy is adhered to, so you're tagging headings as a major heading or a subheading, it needs to be meaningful and succinct, being mindful that some learners rely on screen readers. So there was an instance where a whole paragraph, for example, was tagged as a heading, which is frustrating and misleading to a learner. So it's being mindful that although tagging is done, it needs to be meaningful and appropriate. The same with alt tags, to make sure that those are meaningful and appropriate, rather than describing a crowd of people. Well, what is the learning point in there? What's the reason for showing that image of a crowd, for example? We've also learnt about how I think Minerva itself, the platform, has deployed updates. So, for example, the way that we can display text in an accessible way. We did struggle with how to succinctly and clearly include quotes on screen. We did, and thankfully with the update to Minerva Ultra, there's an accessible way of indenting that content and using the normal quote marks. So it's a smooth experience, user experience for the learner, but also being mindful that the proper quote citation is used at the end, so that, as in, the person that made the quote is included at the end of the quotation, so it's clear to a screen reader that that's the end of the quotation.
Fascinating. There's a lot of detail in here as well. So there's if I could ask that someone put in maybe some of those guidelines that were used, if you put that in the chat, so just the web accessibility, the inclusive accessibility, and things like this, just as a reference point, so that we kind of capture that. But I do want to turn to Claire. I'm really curious, one, why you chose this program, why you chose this specific program and to study it online. And then, of course, a little bit about your experience as a student on this program, almost kind of, did they do what they said they're going to do? I'm just curious, what your experience is, please. So the floor over to you, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I could really answer the question as to why I studied this program. I think I will add in, actually, hello to any people that are from Leicester. I am actually also working at the University of Leicester as a student and education equity, diversity and inclusion project manager. So hello to everyone. And as part of that, I think, as Hannah mentioned in the students' applications as to why they're studying this in the first place, I'm pretty sure I remember writing something along the lines of, I see my job as a form of low-key activism, and this was a way of progressing it forward. That's what I really wanted. But if being crudely honest about it, very specific, I remember scrolling through Facebook one day and seeing an advert for Disability Studies, Rights and Inclusion, University of Leeds online, and I thought, what is this? Go on then, I'll have a look. And then looking through the webpage, and I thought, I want to know all of this stuff. And then I just signed up for it. And it was like mid-August. I was like really close to the deadline, and I just did it. And I thought, what have I actually done? Why have I done this? And it's been painful because a master's degree is painful and hard, but actually it's been brilliant. Really, it has been really good. I haven't really regretted it as much as I've complained in the evenings when I'm studying at the same time after working. That's just my complaints, but actually it's been really brilliant. And I think they absolutely have said that they've done everything that they said they would do. I know that there have been flaws in accessibility in particular, and I know that, you know, we're the first cohort with this iteration of the course. There are going to be things to iron out. Overall, though, the staff have been really supportive. But I know from issues that I've experienced, the issues that other students have experienced, they've been really brilliant at responding quite quickly and providing the support that we needed. I just want to address one of the some of the comments I saw in the chat. One about community. Someone specifically asked, how do they foster community? It's a couple of things, but one most important of all, when we first started the course, so they did a welcome talk. We're not studying yet, but we'll get everyone together just to say hello to everyone and introduce us to some academic staff. There was a prompt to everyone to say, maybe you want to set up a WhatsApp group just to keep in touch with each other and keep supporting each other. And somebody set it up, and honestly, that has been fantastic for us to keep in touch. And a couple of academics that we've had, a couple of tutors we've had, have been almost surprised. Love your very chill cat. He's called Milo. In a few minutes, his food machine will go off and he will run. But thank you. They've been quite surprised by how supportive we are of each other. And I know from my undergraduate degree, we were quite independent. I don't want to say it was competitive, but there wasn't that care. But I think with this degree, obviously with the context of disability studies, it feels like the majority of the cohort has an impairment of some kind, or any other conditions. We're quite supportive of each other individually. We care about each other's lives as well, but we'll share resources and stuff like that. And WhatsApp's really great across time zones, because we know we've had students from, I want to say, somewhere in China, somewhere in Canada as well, a couple of places in Canada and America, and one in Belgium. So the time zones could create difficulty for it. And I know that there's been an issue with the webinars, the live webinars sometimes, which were recorded. But for keeping connected, it's been brilliant to have WhatsApp. We also have discussion boards on Blackboard, Ultra, Minerva, whichever name. And that's okay. It's quite good for having that academic conversation. We're given prompts and encouragement to say, discuss this point, respond to each other. The discussion elements are quite limited in Blackboard. You don't really get an effective notification when someone's responded. It just says, you've had a response, or someone has posted. And it's not helpful to say they've responded to you, or they've responded to something like what they've said. And you can't react. That would be quite nice. I know that we don't have any control over that sort of aspect, but sometimes you don't want to say anything, but you just like, that's brilliant, or I love that, thank you. So there are limitations with that, but WhatsApp has been primarily amazing. What I would also like to mention as well is the peer support sessions. These aren't typically common, but now that I'm in the dissertation project module, they've also set up peer support sessions every few weeks, just for the students to check in, to say how we're getting on, just sharing experiences. And they've been really nice as well, especially now that we're coming towards the end. It's been nice to connect with people and knowing that we're in the same boat. And on that matter, actually, at the very beginning in the first module, they were very conscious of, we're online, let's try and do this as we should do, because it's not too long since the pandemic. We'll use those practices. And it wasn't a massive cohort. I couldn't tell you how many there were, but like a good group of people. and we were split into breakout rooms. And in theory, you get it because you think a nice little group of students, they can talk to each other and share ideas. But we knew that in one group, it might be a very limited conversation because we weren't confident with the answers, especially really early on. We didn't really know stuff. But also you got distracted with just like, oh, what are you doing? Where do you live? How are you? And all of those sort of pastoral questions. And you'd be brought back together and someone had like a really amazing conversation that you weren't a part of. And it was quite frustrating. And they listened to us when we said, don't do breakout rooms anymore. They're just not very good for us. They stopped. Every new module, we're a bit sensitive of, oh, they're going to make us do breakout rooms again, and they didn't. So I think being reactive to what students are saying, where it's really tangible and easy to resolve, easy peasy. And I've seen a couple of questions about assessments, and I can see that Emma's responded really helpfully. And this is something that I push at work now as well. Within assessment criteria, stop specifying the format. It's so much easier to be flexible when you don't specify the format. If it's really essential, and this is work for me coming out now, if it's really essential for what you're actually promoting and what you need students to do, then sure, you need to specify. It needs to be a verbal presentation of some kind if necessary. But if it's not, you really want to focus on the principles of what you're actually trying to get the students to do. So for me, I can say that I think I've submitted most of my presentations, my assessments as presentations, mostly because I've been doing presentations at work and my brain was just easier. It was easier for my brain to just switch to keep doing presentations and have it in that format. And sometimes it's not felt as natural, and I've just done I've done a written assessment. I didn't need to discuss it with anyone, didn't need to ask for permission or arrange anything special, just did it because it worked out better for my preference, the time I had, the way that I work, any of that. So if you don't padlock people into really specific forms of assessment, it's just so much easier. And I know with a colleague that I'm working with at the minute, we're trying to roll out UDL and develop UDL principles within Leicester. That is one of the struggles of getting students to feel confident in choosing other choices. And I think just making it as flat as possible in the sense of it's really not about the format, it's just about how you're communicating your points. And I think that would be one of the biggest things to learn from this whole program. And I think hearing about everything that the Death team and Hannah's team have been doing to get this course to come together, it might sound overwhelming, especially for the universities that are thinking, we don't have these resources, we don't have this amazing team sat behind us, and completely understand that. I think we're all poor at the minute. If you're in that situation, you think I still really want to take from this, consistency in navigation is probably one of the biggest things that you can do, just making it as easy as possible from one module to the next to find things in the same place, know where to go for the information that you need is really essential, because I don't need to think. If I'm looking for certain information, I don't need to decrypt how we might have named that document for this module, or it might depend on the module lead. I don't need to think about any of that. It's all same place, same sort of name, same folders, and I could just find it. And it just eases any concern of mine. And I imagine it eases a lot of staff time and pressure too, because you don't have to answer questions of where can I find this really obvious information that's really cryptically named. You don't need to worry about that if you just take those sort of things into consideration, try and be as consistent as possible. Another point I wanted to come back to, I wrote myself some little notes. Another point I wanted to come back to about, Hannah mentioned we've been drawing from other subjects. And I feel like obviously within the little amount of time that we have in this session, you don't have much time to go into that, but I feel like you undersold it. Like, because if I was listening to this as a member of staff, I'd be like, yeah, you referred to like law, you referred to legal cases and the Equality Act and all that stuff. You referred to history, sure. But actually, no, we had videos, podcasts, articles, written content from staff within other departments where the content overlapped perfectly, or where it related to some research that they've been involved in. We actually heard from those people rather than just hearing about vaguely someone somewhere did something relevant that you might be interested in. And we got to hear from them directly. Sometimes they spoke to us directly. And it was really brilliant to have that interaction and cross-course information, because it can be academia can be very limited and restricted of, no, this is my subject and everyone keep out, or we've just got to keep it all contained. No, sharing of knowledge as much as possible, always the way. I feel like I said a lot of information there, but I thought with the time that we've got left, I just want to say, like, there have been challenges, and I can't emphasize too much with the technical aspects because I wasn't involved as a student, but I think it's been brilliant, and I would push this format, and I have been, and I will continue to do so within the university I work in. I'll keep pushing it because it's a really brilliant format. I do recommend it.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Claire. That was just golden. And as you say, someone in the chat now, best bit, absolutely agree with that. Yeah, the student voice and your kind of experience is just so important. And to the point too about, assessments, about choice. And I think one of the key takeaways here as well is that this is now the standard for all of our online degrees, right? I mean, this has fundamentally completely changed the entire development process. There may be variations within certain programs, and there's some maybe add-ons or additional ones within this program and because of the needs and the audience, but it really has changed. We are serving adult learners. Adult learners need choice. They need options. And I think this is, digital accessibility has pushed the boundaries here in this program, but fundamentally it's about choice and consistency. I love that, what you said, Claire, about that. Just keep it consistent. So are there any, I know Linda's on the screen, so we're probably about time.
Well, I'm very happy for us to carry on, but we need to recognise that some people will need to leave. And I just want to thank the presenters and the audience before everybody leaves. And just to say there's an absolute avalanche of fantastic questions and lots of responses already, but we might take away some more of the questions and add to that, and we can add it to the YouTube channel with the video. We can kind of include the response, but please feel free to carry on. And there's some, this has been a fabulous webinar. Thank you all in the chat. So that's a really nice feeling.
That's great. I think maybe just Hannah because there's a question about scale and things like this and who we're serving. I'm just curious in 2 seconds, how many countries are represented and maybe the kind of the numbers.
Oh, that's a good question. And I know one of the struggles we've got in online is
data,
limited infrastructure, which makes actually finding that kind of information out quite difficult. We've onto our 4th cohort, so we have 2 cohorts starting in September and March, and now we have the full 2 years for the part-time, and I think we've got about 60 students registered overall. So we're hitting about 40 a year.
Yeah, it's such a great program. It's a real joy to see it flourish. I think we really are at time though, but certainly reach out to us. I think we're all kind of accessible as such. Reach out and we can keep the conversation. And I see there's a couple of questions not answered, so we'll try to do that in the follow-up report and make sure that's represented. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a joy.
Thank you. A really, really good session. A round of applause to the presenters, but most importantly, absolutely fantastic that Leeds is doing this and leading all of us forward, because I can see from the chat that people have been really inspired and are really thinking about the ideas that you've put here. So thank you.
Amazing. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.